Do you want to learn more on how to put money to work in regenerative food and agriculture? Follow our video course via investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/course or in the links below. Now, on to the podcast. You're going to listen to an interview with Greg Wichner, co-founder of FarmlandLP. We're going to talk about how FarmlandLP started and how their mission of showing that sustainable agriculture is more profitable than chemical agriculture is shaping up. We talked about how organic milk is the gateway drug into organic products and how they are slowly moving to a more perennial system on their land. Enjoy! Welcome to another episode of Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, Investing as if the Planet Mattered, podcast show where I talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land, grow our food and what we eat. And it's time that we as investors, big and small, and consumers start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. Before we get started, I've been recording these interviews next to my day job, and I will definitely continue to do so and release about an episode a month. But at the same time, I would love to take this further, share more interviews. There are many more stories to share on investing in regenerative food and agriculture. More depth, improve the quality, maybe even doing some video series. So I started a Patreon community, which makes it easy to support creators like myself. If these podcasts have been of value to you, and if you have the means, I invite you to support me and make this happen. For more information, please find the link to my Patreon account in the description below. And now, without further ado, the interview. Enjoy! Welcome to Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, Investing as if the Planet Mattered. I'm Koen van Seijen, your host. In the podcast of today, I'm joined by Greg Wichner, the co-founder of FarmlandLP, one of the leading regenerative agriculture investment funds in the world. Welcome, Greg.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
And to start with, as I usually do, with a personal question. From all the things in the world you could be doing, why are you working on regenerative agriculture and specifically on investing in that?
Well, one is probably the most important thing that we could be doing, but
we agree on that, of course. But how did you end up there and spend your days on that?
So this specifically started really the moment that my daughter was born. I have a daughter; she just turned 11 actually yesterday, and the moment that she was born, I got very clear that my life was about helping her dreams come true. And in that moment, I also saw that we weren't leaving a great planet for her to have those dreams come true in. And I also immediately got very clear that really she couldn't have her dreams come true unless all the kids in that generation could have their dreams come true, and that required a really big shift from the way that we were headed to where we needed to go. And it really just started this inquiry for me that lasted about 2 years about really what am I doing to really make a difference for the future. And so it really took this kind of 2-year introspective process of looking at all the things I had done, all my skills, all my abilities, and it all really came together when I went to go visit a farm with some farms actually for a week. We took a week-long road trip to go up and look at buying some farmland with several friends, and really saw that farmland today just wasn't being managed well, and that there were huge opportunities from a business perspective to shift it, well, from an agronomic perspective, to shift it from conventional agricultural practices to sustainable agriculture practices, and that also mirrored a business opportunity to create more value and increase the cash flow by converting it to organic and also bringing livestock back onto farmland, and really that combination of the benefits of biological farming methods and the business opportunities, and then in the background, the question of what can I do to really make a difference, like, that was the answer. And that really brought some key threads in my life together. And that's what we've been doing since 2009. And we're continuing to do it. And we're on a nice, long journey doing that. And it really all started with the birth of my daughter and asking, what am I doing to make a difference?
And if we take it one step back, what did you look at many other sectors in those 2 years before you decided to spend a week looking at buying some farmland? What were other, let's say, stops in that journey?
I've always done things in my career that have made a difference. Whether my degree is actually in biochemistry and molecular biology, and helped start a biotech company, and we developed treatment for metastatic brain cancer for that. They got it. It's still on the market today. And I've also I grew up managing investment real estate, and I spent summers growing up on a farm as well. And so
all of those came together, basically.
All of those really came together. You asked the question, what else could I do? What else did I look at? And it really, my in some ways, looking at it from here, my life kind of started in 2009, looking at that farmland. And it's kind of where everything was leading to. So.
And if you look at that day or that week that you looked at farmland, probably with those glasses for the first time, like from a business opportunity, instead of spending the summer there, instead of a playground glasses, you looked with the business opportunity glasses. What were the steps after that led to where FarmlandLP now is? What were the first steps? What were some lessons to get it to a product in the market, basically?
Great. So I spent a number of years in private equity, so the business side of it was always kind of crunching in the background. And so when you seeing how farmland is managed today, and so my co-founder was actually on that trip with me as well, Jason Bradford, and he really has this tremendous expertise in sustainable agriculture. And so being really deeply exposed to the practices that were possible around sustainability on farmland, and my role was really listening to it from that business perspective, understanding the biological science in the agriculture, but not knowing it at that level, but really translating it to, hey, how do you really make this happen at a large scale? And how do you scale up sustainable agriculture? How do you shift the paradigm from chemical-dependent agriculture, a chemistry-based approach to agriculture, to a biological approach to agriculture? And so it was back of the envelope work, looking at, if we were going to buy this farmland and be the farmers, we would need at least $10 million worth of farmland in order to make this basically financially viable if we were driving the tractors. And we would need at least $50 million worth of farmland if we were going to turn it into some kind of fund that really other people could invest into. And so that started to be at the beginnings of the scale of the impact that we wanted to have. And fundamentally, we wanted to demonstrate that sustainable agriculture is more profitable than chemical-dependent agriculture. And that would be our way of essentially catalyzing the shift from chemical farming to biological farming. So as soon as we saw that, it would take at least $50 million worth of farmland in a nice fund structure, really on the drive home, I was driving, Jason was sitting in the passenger seat, our friends were sitting in the back, and on that drive back from Oregon to California, we really sketched out the fund of FarmlandLP and have been working on it full time ever since.
And how close is it? Do you still have the sketches, first of all? And how close is it to what it is now, to those sketches?
So I do still have the notes somewhere, but a lot of it was initially was the mental picture of it, really understanding that farmland is a long-term asset. So the first fund was actually a 30-year fund, but the core tenets of it are basically the same as what we're doing now, buying farmland, converting it to organic, managing it sustainably, and demonstrating that it's more profitable. So we've actually shown that on the farmland that we've managed over all this time, that the organic farmland generates 72% more revenue per acre than the conventional farmland. So we're really demonstrating these numbers, which is really quite nice.
Yeah, which is absolutely essential for the industry. I mean, the regenerative agriculture industry, the sustainable agriculture industry. Can you walk us through an example of, could be a hypothetical one or a real one, where you bought land and what is really the difference on, and also in the ground, but on the ground and managing? How is it so different? You mentioned bringing livestock back. What is the shift you make in terms of managing this land different? And for the non-farmers in the audience, what should we picture when we think about that?
Great question. So the first thing is to have a clear understanding about what conventional commodity agriculture looks like. So the U.S. has $2.6 trillion worth of farmland, and that's the same economic value as all of the office buildings in the U.S. or all of the apartment buildings in the U.S. And 40% of farmland is leased. So it is commercial real estate, like those other two sectors. And farmland, leased farmland, is really just farmed on a year-by-year basis. Neither the landlords nor the farmers have real incentive to really invest in the land. And combined with government policies, you end up with 53% of U.S. farmland growing two commodity crops, corn and soy. It's not because those are the best crops to grow on the land. It's really an artifact of the ownership structure and the incentives and the regulatory structure. And so what that, though, does create is a lot of opportunities to switch from that commodity agriculture system to something better. And so that's really what we focus on. And so here's an example of some opportunities. So we bought a large property 50 miles east of where I am now, 4,200 acres. It's about 3.1 miles by 3.1 miles in size. And it was growing, one of the main crops it was growing there was commodity corn, not for human consumption. It was actually, well...
As it usually isn't for human consumption, yeah.
Exactly.
What is it, about 80% or something in the US? I don't have the latest numbers, but...
Humans eat less than 1% of the corn grown in the United States.
Oh, wow.
As fresh corn, and then there's about 2 or 3% that's used in tortillas and tamales and things like that. But 12% of U.S. corn is turned into high fructose corn syrup.
Even better.
Yeah. 40% is turned into ethanol, 40% is fed to livestock. And this corn was frequently sold to be turned into high fructose corn syrup. Just to paint this picture, this is beautiful farmland, very high quality farmland, 50 miles away from San Francisco, which is the largest market for locally grown organic food in my knowledge in the world.
In the world, probably. Yeah.
So very underutilized from a business standpoint, from a revenue per acre standpoint. But it was just very operationally efficient for the farmers and didn't require a lot of investment. So what we did is we bought this land and we said, okay, what's the best way to maximize biological productivity and economic value from this farmland? And that looks very different. So rather than just growing commodity corn year after year after year on this land, we switched that over, planted some of the ground in pasture, and again, high quality corn land. Instead of the corn, some of the corn was sold to dairies or feedlots. Instead of growing corn, harvesting it, selling to a feedlot, we planted pasture and brought in sheep and cattle tenants on that land. Very regenerative and restorative to the land, and generates great economics as well.
Instead of driving the corn to the cow, you...
And it produces the same amount of meat per acre if we're growing pasture or if we produce, or if they produce corn and sell it to feedlots. So,
and a lot less costs, I can imagine, from an economic perspective.
There's a lot less costs. There's a lot less chemical inputs. There are some higher labor costs, but still, it ends up being better for.
And the premium you can get for true, pasture-based meat, of course, in San Francisco is a very different level compared to the feedlot animals.
Exactly. Grass-fed, grass-finished animals do receive a price premium, and there is exactly strong market demand for them as well. So we plant some of the land in pasture. Usually it's in pasture for 3 to 7 years. Really maximizes that soil fertility. We get it certified organic, and then rotate in to organic vegetables, and then rotate into grains, and then back into the pasture phase. And the vegetables, for example, instead of being corn that's turned into high fructose corn syrup, it can be sweet corn, for example, that is directly consumed and bought at farmers markets or at large retailers like Costco or Whole Foods, and much better economics. So at least 4 to 6 times more revenue per acre growing sweet corn than commodity corn. So do vegetables for 2 to 3 years, then rotate into grains. Organic grains, they use up some of that excess nitrogen that's in the soil. And the grains also, they're very fine, strong roots, also really break up that soil again. And then it can rotate back into pasture and begin its 7 to 10 year rotation cycle again. So, and again, we've demonstrated that the land that's organic is generating 72% more revenue per acre than if it stayed in that commodity system.
And that revenue, where does that come from? Is it the tenants selling it? Is it FarmlandLP having a brand or a stand at a farmer's market or at Whole Foods? How does that work?
Great. So the revenue that I'm talking about is the revenue that FarmlandLP sees, and so that's generally in the form of rent, either fixed rent or revenue share. And the farmers are the ones that are generally selling that. I might have a relationship with contract with Costco or a processor, and they're also. The only reason we're getting more revenue is that they're getting much more revenue and more profits as well.
And is it difficult to find farmers, tenants that are, let's say, that look this holistically, or that they're used to work with multiple crops, multiple rotations, etc.? Is that one of your challenges, or is it relatively easy in the US? I know here in Europe it's difficult to find people that are able to do multiple crops and livestock and do that in a way that makes economic sense.
Yeah, so I have to split up your question into 2 parts. One is, are there farmers around who grow organically and sustainably? And the answer to that is yes. We're generally buying farmland in areas that already have strong demand for locally grown organic food. And so you have farmers who are already producing this way. And already have markets. And their biggest constraint is that they don't have enough organic land in order to produce the food to serve their markets. So we provide that land. We help take that land through the organic conversion process, get it certified organic, and provide it to them. Now, the second part of your question is farmers growing a multitude of crops. It is very hard for farmers to produce sheep, cattle, corn, tomatoes, squash, wheat, buckwheat, other kinds of grains.
It goes against all our lessons in economic classes about specialization, etc.
Exactly. It is tremendously challenging, and the power of specialization is really amazing and a feature of our economic system. It also drives the 53% of U.S. farmland to grow to commodity crops, which is bad, but unequivocally for a number of reasons. But if we look at that the benefits of specialization and we apply it to sustainable agriculture, then you say, you know what, you do want the person who grows the best tomatoes possible to have as much land as they need in order to serve their markets, the market for beautiful organic tomatoes. But you just can't grow tomatoes on the same ground year after year after year. That tomato farmer needs to rotate around. And so we provide the land management and the land ownership to make sure that they have, one, enough land so that they can grow to the right size to meet their markets. Two, making sure that they always have fresh land that they're growing tomatoes in the right part of that sustainable rotation. And so that, in a lot of ways, is the beauty and magic of the FarmlandLP model that we did, which was to harness both organic and sustainable agriculture and specialization, helping those farmers really grow to the scale that they need in order to serve their customers.
And I can see the elegance and the beauty of the model and the system. I can also imagine it raises some questions for the tenants and the farmers, especially as they are building up the soil but don't have a long-term connection to that specific piece of land they need to be comfortable with. And I don't know how you organize that, but comfortable that you find them another piece where they can move the year after with their tomatoes, because otherwise, of course, they have customers and no tomatoes. So how do you make sure that relationship with your farmers is not tied specifically to one spot of land, but basically to you as FarmlandLP? How do you organize that?
Sure. Well, they can see all the land that we own, and we're long-term landowners. So they can also see that, and they can sign long-term relationships with us to get access to hundreds of acres of land, and that's the specific acres may rotate over time, but it's really, like I mentioned, this 4,200 acre single piece of property. You're not growing 4,200 acres of tomatoes each year. You're growing, several hundred, hundreds of acres of tomatoes. And so instead of, when you drive onto the farm, instead of going left, you might go right. And these farmers are very used to rotating like that. And I can give them 10-year access or more to that farmland. But most importantly for them, I can say, you know what, you're going to get farmland that's always 1 or 2 years out from having been pasture for 3 to 7 years. So they know that they're actually always going to be getting essentially virgin soil that has high soil fertility and very low pest pressure. So they're actually going to have much reduced operating costs and greater yields than if they were trying to farm on the same ground year after year. And they wouldn't have to worry about planting broccoli, corn, and wheat on 3/4 of their ground so that they could get 1/4 of the ground growing tomatoes. They could just focus all of their efforts growing great tomatoes and serving their customers. So there really are a lot of benefits in there, and really the farmers get it very quickly, and they're very excited about it, and they really like working with us.
No, I can definitely imagine. And speaking of soil fertility, what's the difference? You with a biology background as well, what's the difference you see maybe from the land you started working 8 years ago and now, or this big piece of land you mentioned? What, from a non-expert or non-farmer perspective, how would you describe the difference of managing some of these pieces of land for 8 seasons so differently?
Great. The first piece of property that we bought up in Oregon was 154 acres, and we put it pretty much in pasture right away. And the first piece of land that we rotated out of pasture and put it into squash, we had a farmer who was an expert at growing. He had grown some organic squash, but it was mostly conventional squash. And so he did both. He farmed organic squash that was turned into baby food. And in farming this ground, he said that had been in pasture for, I think, 4 years at the time. He said that this was his least weedy field ever that he had seen, conventional or organic. So the pasture phase had really broken down the weeds. We had wonderful clear fields. We had great productivity on that land, and he could really see a dramatic difference in soil quality versus ground that had been managed conventionally up until that point, and that continued. And then you can see actually as you farm it with annual crops how that ground changes. So over several years, weed pressure can increase a little bit, soil fertility can go down a little bit. And at that point, there's a certain point that you say, okay, now we're going to rotate it into grains and then put it back into pasture. And so that's the kind of ongoing year-by-year management that we do, and the flexibility that we have in these rotations. But it's a very wonderful process, and you always put in a lot and take a little out, and then put it back into the pasture or perennial phase again to regenerate it. So we're always making it better on this kind of nice, slow, undulating upward cycle. It's fun.
And I can imagine you measure that as well.
We do.
Biodiversity, that's how you come up with the planning and the flexibility.
We do. We measure a number of things. There is one of my favorite quotes, which is that not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything you measure matters. And so there are some things that are harder to manage that I wish we could on a very quantitative basis, but there are key indicators, and one of the things also is getting scientists to agree on what some of the benefits are. And I'll give you a very specific example. We were actually, we applied for and got a grant from the USDA for $250,000 to translate our agricultural practices into, have two scientific groups identify the physical benefits that we're creating through improved soil quality, improved water, improved air, etc., and biodiversity, and also translate those into economic benefits. And this is going to be released either later this year or early next year.
That's not easy, probably.
It's not easy. But we're very grateful to have the $250,000 grant from the USDA, and it's a good process. One of the things that is a personal frustration of mine is that when you look at carbon sequestration, so we're sequestering a lot of carbon in the ground, and agricultural practices have an opportunity to sequester very meaningful amounts of atmospheric carbon, so somewhere between 10 and 24% of the annual output could be sequestered in agricultural soils.
It's the reason why I'm interested in regenerative agriculture, apart from the great food, obviously.
Yeah, that too. That's a lot of reasons. All the science on carbon sequestration is basically based on the carbon that's stored in the top 6 to 8 inches of topsoil. Now, if you look at our pasture phase, you dig down and roots are going down 6 to 8 feet, not 6 to 8 inches, and the roots are basically pumping carbon into the soil, into that deep soil. But there is not sufficient data to be able to quantify the amount of carbon that's going in below those top 6 to 8 inches. And so what ends up on our reports is we get 0 credit for carbon going below basically 8 inches. And this is one of the big quandaries for me, is because I dig a hole and I see that carbon is being pumped into the ground below that, and it seems wrong to apply 0 credit to that carbon. But that's where the science basically needs to catch up to that. And I really just think in general we're underreporting the amount of carbon that gets sequestered in some of these good agricultural practices. And it's okay, and it's very important to have scientific consensus. I'm a huge fan of that. But this is an example where uncertainty can get in the way of really communicating the full potential of sustainable agriculture, really the full benefits of sustainable agriculture.
It's like a positive externality that's not being brought into the operation. Yeah.
Exactly. Just like the dead zones aren't being incorporated as a negative externality on the corn thing.
They would be bankrupt if they would.
Exactly. And yet my pasture has to compete economically with the price of commodity corn being sold to feedlots. So not only do I have to beat that on a pure economic playing field, but I also am not getting the crop subsidies and crop insurance that they're getting. It's very difficult to insure livestock, but they can insure corn, right? Can't insure the pasture with livestock on it, but they get corn insurance, and yet that has negative externalities. We have positive externalities, and we just don't get any credit for that. So it's okay. I think it's something that will play out over time. You get paid for it in terms of resilience. Anyway, it's an example of how sustainable agriculture, even with one hand tied behind its back, is still superior.
Or two, yeah.
Yes.
No, I can see that. And in terms of, you mentioned the rotation, and what's the long-term vision for that land? You mentioned some perennials. Will that rotation keep rotating, or are you introducing some perennial systems plans that at some point the landscape will change, or will it just be, or just between brackets, will it be this 7 to 8 year rotation you will do for eternity?
That's a really great question. So we really look at the land and what its highest and best use is, what its ideal use is in the realm of sustainable agriculture. So we're not looking at Walmarts. We're not planting Walmarts on this.
Also real estate.
Yes. But so we actually, for example, on some of our land just completed a permanent crop suitability study where we looked at all the main success factors for permanent crops and identified actually about half of the acreage that could be converted to permanent crops. And it's a mix of trees and vines and organic blueberries, for example. And so we do think that this mix of open ground and the perennial crops really have some wonderful synergies, both agronomically and ecologically, as well as economically. And so that's one of the things that's happening now to enhance the ecology, and it will also deliver very positive benefits for the investors as well.
Oh, very interesting. And for FarmlandLP itself, if we look back maybe a year ago, and what has changed in terms of your work, in terms of FarmlandLP? What have been the major shifts you've been busy with and happy to share?
That's a great question. So, we now manage just around 13,000 acres worth of farmland, and we're at a scale now where we're able to hire and bring in really extraordinary people. And so over the past more than a year, but it's kind of borne fruit over the past year, is really be able to build up a really extraordinary farm management team. And that's been a fun process. It's been a hard work process, but that's really paying off. And it's been the biggest change over the past year.
And what does the farm management team do within FarmlandLP?
So they do everything from managing the planning out the rotations of the land, every single field. We look at a 10-year management plan on that land and look back as far as we can. So it could be 4 to 9 years or more. And so it's that strategic planning around the crop rotations. It's getting that land certified organic. And we also, particularly in Oregon, we do some direct farming as well, in addition to the tenant partner farmers that we work with. And we also do the some livestock management as well. So not livestock ownership, but just the management of the livestock on the ground. So, what we do is it is more complex than just a corn soy rotation. And so
but it's much more fun.
it's much more fun. It is more complex, and so having the people in place and the systems in place to really manage that on a go-forward basis, we're at a good scale.
So if we would look back a year from now, what would you be most happy with that have happened in let's say the next few months, but also in let's say if we look at August next year?
That's great. So continued systems development and growth on the farm management side. The things that are kind of exciting right now are integrating more technology into what we're doing. So I have a technology background as well, and so integrating aerial imaging, multispectral aerial imaging.
You're close to Silicon Valley.
Exactly. And so integrating our GIS system with the regular crop imaging, determine biological productivity, and feeding that back to the farm managers so that it's not just reliant on scouting, and we can really kind of see problems as they're happening and give feedback, whether it's a tenant farmer or a farm team, whether it's on growing crops or pest issues, nutrient issues, or irrigation as well. There's some exciting things that are basically coming into place now and over the next 12 months that are exciting.
Very, very interesting. That will change significantly because you're managing such large plots. Scouting is always an issue because you can never see everything, and from the air, at least in theory, it's a lot easier.
In theory, it's easier, and there's sometimes weed pressure builds up. In an organic system, weeds are an important issue. And if you have green or brown at the wrong times, you most likely have a weed issue that you can send people out to look at and deal with and catch early. And so if you've if a field has been plowed, but there's a lot of green there that you haven't planted yet, you've got a weed issue, and you probably want to deal with that before you plant your next crop. If you have a pasture field, but you have large dead spots in there, you probably have a weed problem in that pasture, and the weeds probably have gone to seed and died off very quickly, and so you're not going to get a lot of livestock forage off of that land, and maybe it's time to rotate that field out into annual crops or replant a pasture. So we can, with the use of technology, help identify those issues, help quantify them, and really discuss them at a management level. Discuss issues at a management level that otherwise might have been caught just at the pasture management level. So it really gives us an opportunity to quickly and efficiently manage issues that can end up impacting the economics at the end of the year, or impact the land rotations. So it really actually brings that technology, rather than remove us from the land, actually can bring us much closer to it.
And for FarmlandLP, at the place where you are now after 8 years, what's the biggest bottleneck for growth? What's the biggest bottleneck for FarmlandLP at the moment?
We have a great team. We're at a very good scale from a management standpoint, from a management team standpoint, and we have the capability to manage more acres, and we have properties that we want to acquire. So at this particular phase, we're raising additional capital to buy more land that really is contiguous with our existing properties, and so that just from a scale perspective, that's where we are right now.
And in terms for the sector, I mean, you're very active in the sector. You've been in that for a while, and probably one of the key players in the regenerative agriculture sector. What do you see as the main barriers to scale up the regenerative agriculture sector and really get it to a much higher level?
I really think that when we started this, I was concerned about competition and about a lot of competitors coming into the space, and now I'm concerned about competition, meaning there's not enough of it. So there's not enough people really taking on sustainable agriculture, and it's because it takes several years to get the land certified organic. It then takes time to get to show those economic benefits. So hopefully, what we're doing by showing that it does work, that we do have increased returns from organic and sustainable agriculture, that this will expand, and we'll continue to hit additional milestones, and we'll continue to publicize those as much as we can. So I really think that the big catalytic shift comes from the average everyday farmer understanding and being very clear that sustainable agriculture is more profitable than chemical-dependent agriculture. You have the customer demand out there, which is phenomenal and continues to grow like a freight train. You have strong demand from the buyers, the packaged food companies, the retailers, etc., and you have farmers that will grow those crops, whether it's organic or conventional, but it takes that land. It takes someone managing that land and being willing to take the 3 years to convert it to organic in order to have that farmland be organic to serve those organic markets. We're trying to help investors in general, whether who invest with us or externally, understand the benefits of that and understand that it does work and it is worth that. It's worth that journey. It's a worthy journey.
And what do you say to people who are saying that organic is starting to lose a bit of its content, that maybe the bar is a bit too low, that it's many people are organic according to certification, but if you look at if they're building soil or not, if they're looking at it with a more holistic view, they maybe aren't. How do you look at that debate?
I look at it as when people start to ask questions about what they're buying in the supermarket, what food they're putting in their kids' mouth, or their own. Once they start asking questions, that they are on the good journey. So
they never stop. Yeah, you can't go back.
They never stop, and we call milk the gateway drug for organics, because the organic mom, when she moves from breastfeeding the child to giving them a bottle, organic milk is generally the first organic product that new organic consumers buy to feed their little baby. So they're asking the question, what do I want to put in my baby, and what went into that food? Well, then they buy organic baby food. Then then the whole household shifts. It happens, and it's natural, and it's beautiful. And you keep asking questions. What's in my food? And I think it's great. The organic standards are not the holy grail. There are some issues in it. There's a whole spectrum of sustainable agriculture practices that are really amazing, really extraordinary, and affect everyone in their daily lives beyond just what they put in their mouths. Once you start asking these questions, you really just don't stop. You're awake at that point, and it's just part of a really wonderful journey.
And if you mentioned already you're sometimes also working with or advising investors that haven't invested in your fund, or showing that it's possible. Let's pretend there's a whole arena of smart impact investors listening to this podcast, which might be there actually. But what would you advise them where to start? They are ready to invest, they put their capital, maybe their full portfolio, to work in regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture, but they don't know where to start. What would be your first step as an advice?
I really want them first to know themselves and to know what they're investing in and what they're looking for. The first question to ask themselves is, what's their time frame for investing? There's often a confusion between the charitable impact that they want to have and the investment needs that they have. And so, and they may think that they're impact first, but they really need their capital back. And they really want a return on their investment because they have very specific goals, whether it's for their lifetimes or their kids. And so to know those investment parameters first and then look at, okay, what kind of impact do I want to have? That's great. And once they're clear on that, then they can look at, okay, great, what can go in the public markets and what should go in the private markets. And in the private market, what we've done is set up something that's much more heavily weighted to land and commercial real estate. So long-term investments that have appreciation and cash flow, but it's very long-term and it's not liquid. Some people may want more operating risk and invest directly in farms, and that's great. Capital is definitely needed there, but they need to understand the risk cycles there. They're greater than investing on just the farmland side, but there are also great opportunities there. So for investors, number one, to know themselves, and then to be able to see how any of these investments in sustainable agriculture really fit for them, so that they can make them powerfully, allocate the right amount of their portfolio to it, and really know that they are actually making a difference in a way that really works for them and really works for the world as well.
Thank you so much for that. And with that, I would like to finish this interview. Thank you so much for your time. I'd definitely be checking in a year from now and to see how the drones or the aerial photography is working, and of course how everything else is going with FarmlandLP. Thank you so much, Greg.
Wonderful speaking with you, Koen.
You just listened to an interview with Greg Wichner, co-founder of FarmlandLP, and we talked about how they're making sustainable farmland more profitable than conventional chemical farmland. Thank you for making the time to listen to this podcast and making it all the way till the end. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you found the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast valuable, there are a few simple ways you can use to support it. Number one, rate and review the podcast on your podcast app. That's the best way for other listeners to find the podcast, and it only takes a few seconds. Number two, share this podcast on social media or email it to your friends and colleagues. Number three, if this podcast has been of value to you, and if you have the means, please join my Patreon community to help grow this platform and allow me to take it further. You can find all the details on patreon.com/regenerativeagriculture or in the description below. Thank you so much, and see you at the next podcast. Dear friends of the podcast, I'm super excited to share with you the online video course Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. How to put money to work in regenerating soils at scale and growing a lot of tasty food while doing it. Why are we doing this course? After 100 interviews and more than 100 hours of audio asking the question how to put money to work in regenerating soils, and have been following the space since 2011 and recording these podcasts since 2016, we thought it was time to share our lessons learned. What have we seen in the space over the last years? How have we built our decision-making framework? What to focus on with the podcast? How have we picked interviewees? And what questions should you ask? What is happening in the space? What should you read? What should you listen? What should you watch? How to approach this space? For whom is this course? You, the soil builders and investors in this space. The soil builders, people working in this space, entrepreneurial farmers, fund managers, vehicle builders, crowd investing, platform builders, agtech companies, farm-to-gut food companies, permaculture, keyline designers, holistic management consultants, etc., etc. People that are building soil at scale. And the investors who are putting their own money to work through their family office or as private individuals, or people who are putting other people's money to work through foundations, institutional capital, banks, insurance companies, etc. Is this course free? No. This is pay what you think it's worth. Meaning, I have no way of knowing what this course will be worth to you. And I'm very aware that among the listeners of this podcast, we have people with very different means. So I'm inviting you, if this course is creating value to you, and if you have the means, to consider paying what you think it's worth. Thank you. So what is this course? It's currently a series of 17 videos, mostly ranging from 10 to 15 minutes, plus PDF slides, so you don't have to ride along. We're going to look into why invest in regenerative agriculture and why extractive agriculture is so risky, how to invest, what kind of frameworks you could and I think should build, what to invest in, what kind of co-investors you could find, or what kind of investors you could find if you're a soy builder. Every lesson will have a digging deeper part where I will share what kind of reports, what kind of interviews, what kind of videos you can look into if you want to dig deeper. We're going to look at nutrient density, landscape design, and a lot more. So what is it not? It's not a list of investable deals. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist in this world. We're really at the beginning of the regenerative agriculture and food revolution. It's also not investment advice. Before making any investment, please find professional investment advice. So get ready, get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or whatever you're drinking, click on the link below, sign up, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback.